I think last Sunday, Richard stimulated some interesting conversation as a result of his presentation, and we look forward to it again. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Anybody understands? Probably use Facebook and Zoom. Next Sunday we can use your help. John and I were not able to.
Mike.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and again, if I drop my voice to the point you can't hear me, you're hearing me okay now? Yeah, okay. But if I do drop my voice and move away from the mic, pardon?
You gotta stay there.
Yeah. It might be good. I might do that. I gotta go forward here. So last. Okay, so if John Hertzberger was able to make a promotion for his condo last Sunday, certainly I should be able to make a promotion for this concert this afternoon at 2:00. Sorry for the early hour, but there's a reason behind that. Part of it is assembly has morning services and late afternoon services. We just have a little window of time in there to get in, have a concert, put things back in place again, and have people leave before the next congregation, Faith Ministry, comes here. So that's why it's so early. There's more to that story, but I don't think I should get into that because it will sound too much like a complaint. So yes, you may have read this in the newsletter this week, but we actually have 5 men from this congregation singing this group. So Lee Dangler, Kent Beck, myself,
Kevin Miller.
Kevin Miller, and
Kevin Miller. Jeffrey Weaver. Jeffrey Weaver.
oh, Jeffrey Weaver, yes, of course. Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is what we're going to be looking at this morning. The 2 different versions of the 4th commandment from the 10 commandments. But before we get into that, I'm going to have June Yoder read us a poem. And let me just say a word about this poem. It's called Obedience. It was written by Caesar Buny, which is a pen name, actually. His given name was Stan Wiersma. And he was an English prof, and apparently a very beloved English prophet, then Calvin College, now Calvin University. And unfortunately, he died somewhat young, and there was a lot of grief around his death. But anyway, I'm going to have June read it once, and then we're going to pause a little bit, and I'm just going to see if you have any responses to the first question. What did you hear? This is not the time to interpret or give your own opinions, but what did you hear in this reading of the poem? And then after she reads it, we'll take a little time for that. After she reads it a second time, then we'll look at the second and the third question here. But just to remind you, this comes out of the Christian Reformed tradition, or would have been Dutch Reformed at one point. And as many people before me have said, theologically, they are very different from us, but sociologically, they're not so different because they're kind of ethnic-based tradition and denomination. People who came from the Netherlands, Dutch, and that will come through the theology. The Calvinist theology will come through a little bit, but some of the sociological dimensions. So, go ahead.
Were my parents right or wrong not to mow the right
oats that Sunday morning with the rainstorm threatening. I reminded them that the Sabbath was made for man. And I reminded them of the ox fallen into the pit. Without oat crop, I argued, the cattle would need to survive on town-bought oats. And then it wouldn't pay to keep them. And isn't selling cattle at a loss like an ox in a pit? My parents did not argue. We went to church. We sang the usual psalms louder than usual. And we, the others whose hearts were at stake. Jerusalem, where blessing waits, our feet are standing in thy gates. God, be merciful to me. On thy grace I rest my plea. Donnie's, the pastor's spur of the moment concession. He rides on clouds, the wings of the storm, the lightning and wind his missions perform. Dominic made no concession on sermon length. 5 good reasons for infant baptism, though we heard little of it. For more floods came and more winds blew and beat upon that house than we had figured on, even more lightning and thunder and hail the size of bullet eggs. Falling branches snapped the electric wires. We sang the closing psalm without the organ and in the dark. Ye seed from Abraham descended, God's covenant love is never ended. Afterward, we rode by our oat field, flattened. We still will mow it, Dad said. 10 bushels to the acre, maybe what would have been 50 if I had moved right out and mowed right after milking, and if the whole family had shocked. We could have had it weatherproof before the storm. Later at dinner, Dad said, God was testing us. I'm glad we went. Those psalms never gave me such a lift as this morning. Mother said, I wouldn't have missed it. And even I thought, but did not say, how guilty we would feel now if we had saved the harvest. One time, Dad asked me why I live in a Black neighborhood. I reminded him of that Sunday morning. Immediately, he understood.
Okay, anybody want to comment on what you heard? Let's speak from where you are, let's project. We need to rest on Sunday. We need to rest on Sunday. Is that what you said, Will?
Sounds like attitudes I learned as a child.
Sounds like attitudes I learned as a child at Middleton.
It talks about the poet has a transition in his thinking
Yeah, the poet has a transition in his thinking.
that's shown at the end of it.
Yeah, at the very end. It's very cryptic. And we might want to have a little conversation about the meaning of the end, the next round.
Following group rules.
Following the group rule. Okay, yeah. Okay, let's hear it again, June, and then we'll talk this a little bit more.
Good approach for life. Move the mic closer to your mouth.
Easier to move my mouth closer to the mic. Then.
Yes.
Were my parents right or wrong not to mow the ripe oats that Sunday morning with the rainstorm threatening? I reminded them that the Sabbath was made for man and of the ox fallen into the pit. Without an oats crop, I argued, the cattle would need to survive on town-bought oats, and then it wouldn't pay to keep them. Isn't selling cattle at a loss like an ox in a pit? My parents did not argue. We went to church. We sang the usual psalms, louder than usual. We and the others whose harvests were at stake. Jerusalem, where blessings wait, our feet are standing at thy gates. God be merciful to me, on thy grace I rest my plea. Dominique, the pastor's spur of the moment concession, he rides on the clouds, the wings of the storm, the lightning and wind his visions perform. Dominique made no concession on sermon length, 5 good reasons for infant baptism, though we heard very little of it. For more floods came and more winds blew and beat upon that house than we had figured on, even more lightning and thunder and hail the size of bullet eggs. Falling branches snapped the electric wires. We sang the closing hymn without the organ and in the dark. Ye seed from Abraham descended, God's covenant love is never ended. Afterward, we rode by our oats field, flattened. We still will mow it, Dad said. 10 bushels to the acre, maybe. What would have been 50 if I had mowed it right after milking, and if the whole family had shot, we could have had it weatherproof before the storm. Later, at dinner, Dad said, God was testing us. I'm glad we went. Those psalms never gave me such a lift as they did this morning. Mother said, I wouldn't have missed it. Even I thought, but I did not say, how guilty we would feel now if we had saved the harvest. One time, excuse me, the one time God asked me why I live in a Black neighborhood, I reminded him of that Sunday morning. Immediately, he understood.
Thank you, Jen. So, how do you respond? There's two opportunity more to respond with your own thinking or at a emotional level or say something interpretive, whatever John Bender here.
Logic at odds with something larger, but not illogical.
Or logic,
At odds with something larger. But the larger part is not illogical.
okay, logic at odds with something larger, but the larger part is not illogical. Yeah, okay. What else? Yes, no.
It reminded me of being a teenager in Finger Illinois. Saturday night, we went for a haircut downtown. It was 2 blocks long. And the farmers there were having a big debate on exactly this issue. It's harvest time. will you go out on Sunday? And the one farmer said, of course I will. I'll be generous in contributing, but I think the owner wants me to get out there and save the crop. The other one said, no, the last time I did that, my combine broke down. Sure, it was because it was on Sunday, and actually I lost 2 more days. So I went fishing instead.
Did you all hear what else said? That's a great story. So my question though, were they Mennonite farmers? Okay. John.
Senior year of high school at Eston. And one day I went to the only filling station in town. And I said, why are you open on Sunday? And he said, if it weren't for you Mennonites, I wouldn't have to be.
So what do you make of that ending? His dad asked him sometime later when he was on his own, obviously, why are you living in a black neighborhood? And he reminded him of his dad of that Sunday, and immediately his dad understood. What's the takeaway there?
Well, it connects to the comment John Bender made a few minutes ago, and actually to the sermon we had this morning, following the foundation, the rock on which this writer operates, is doing what is required of someone who's a follower of the way.
So his parents put him on a firm foundation, and the longer term implications of that was that he deliberately chose to live in a black neighborhood. Is that what you're saying?
At
Yes.
what point is obedience and a firm foundation a different thing?
At what point is obedience and a firm foundation a different thing?
Seems like obedience is a big part of that poem and a big part of the seventh day resting.
Anybody want to respond to John?
We often criticize Amish for making nitpicking decisions about electricity, for example. But I must say, as I reflect on this, I have a lot of difficulty seeing the difference between getting the ox out of the ditch and getting that oats harvest. Seems to me they're very similar.
Healthcare happens every day of the week. And of course, you can, in turns, you can resolve some service, but you have to be on some service. And I remember early in our stay here in Goshen, how many times my wife and our young children went to church, and I was at the hospital, and there's no other place.
So in the modern world, we do make hard and complex decisions, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's not take much time now. If we have time, we can come back to that third question. It just occurs to me that, you know, if you would throw out the part about, you know, 5 reasons for infant baptism and singing only of psalms, which is the Reformed tradition. This could have been written by, I think, a Mennonite poet. What do you think?
It reflects what Madison Avenue would call loyalty to the brand.
Loyalty to the brand. In this case, the brand being the Reformed Church.
Yeah, or, you know, any church that says you don't work on Sunday, that's part of your brand.
Okay. Or I'm curious, how you respond to my supposition that, you know, take out a couple of reform markers that this could have been written by an older generation. And I thought,
the people that could have been fed from those fields. I mean, it could have kept people from starving.
so that's the ox in the ditch. Yeah.
Or what if 10 years down the road, they financially didn't have what they might have had.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the dilemma. Faithfulness to principle over against making some prudential decisions in real world. Not easy answers to that. Okay, I think we need to move on to the 10 Commandments and the 4th commandment. Okay, so as the earlier slide indicated, we have two versions of the 10 Commandments, one in Exodus 20 and the other one in Deuteronomy 5. And we'll come to that eventually. But it seems pretty clear that the 10 Commandments, as we have them in the Bible right now, were embellished somewhere along the line. They were kind of fleshed out, spelled out a little bit. And they wouldn't have fit on, you know, 2 tablets of stone, obviously. So one Jewish scholar speculates about what the original version of the 10 Commandments might have been. So I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before you. You shall make no carved likeness, etc., etc. And then the 4th one is, remember the Sabbath day to hallow it. Hallow it means to set aside, to make it sacred, to make it holy. So here we have the 2 versions of the 4th commandment side by side. And I have a handout here. These I have 40. That may be enough to go around, but if not, a couple of you can share, I'm sure. But all the texts that I hope to focus on here this morning, we might not get all on this, so you're able to refer to them yourself. So at the top, I had the 2 versions of the 4th commandment printed out. And some of you probably realize this, that different traditions number the 10 commandments differently. Myrna can get one of those. Yeah, just wait a second. Everybody got one? So just a couple of things by way of background first. The first tablet of the Ten Commandments had to do with our relationship with God. Get back to that. I am the Lord your God. You shall make no carved likeness. You shall not take the name of the Lord God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to hallow. There's an imbalance between the two tablets. 4 commandments on the first tablet, 6 commandments on the second tablet. Put tablets in these kinds of scary quotes. The 4th commandment is, however, kind of a hinge commandment because it does address our relationship with God, but it also addresses our relationship with other people, particularly in the forms in which we have them now. So in other words, it seems as though the 4th commandment is to shape both our relationship with God and with our neighbor, with other people. It has both dimensions to it. Now, I want you to just reflect a little bit. What differences do you see in these two versions, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5? Do a little quick, close reading of the text. Two other things I should have said about the 4th commandment in general. One is that this is the one commandment in all 10 commandments that has both a prohibition, no work, and a command, keep or observe the Sabbath. And the other thing that I should have said too is that about the commandments as a whole, that the commandments are kind of like the preamble to the covenant which God made with the people of Israel. And God was going to be the people's God and was going to look after the people. But as part of the deal, part of the covenant that God was making, there were demands being placed on the people, and these 10 commandments are part of those demands. So, have you picked up on any differences between the two versions?
Richard, in the first one, the rationale for keeping it has to do with creation, and the second one it has to do with coming out of Egypt.
Exactly. So the two versions have different intent or motivation clauses. The one harkens back to Genesis 2 that we looked at last week, when God rested on the 7th day and told us to rest, but nowhere is the word Sabbath actually used there. And the other version, Deuteronomy, harkens back to their captivity in Egypt when they were slaves. And they were working almost day and night for 7 days a week, and they never had any respite. And they pleaded to the Pharaoh to give them a day off, and they couldn't get it. And God brought them out of Egypt, and this becomes a reason for maintaining the commandment to remember the Sabbath. Anything else you see? The other thing is then there's a different word used here with these two. Exodus says to remember the Sabbath. And Deuteronomy says to observe or keep. So taking these two versions of the fourth commandment together, we can see that there's both a memorial dimension to Sabbath keeping, as well as an observance dimension. And in that respect, it's really no different than when we celebrate communion. It's a memorial to Christ's death, but it's also an observance, something we do together. And it's a Christian practice that is supposed to enable our discipleship. So another thing I wanted to point out about this fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment, is that it's a great leveler. Not only should the people of God keep the Sabbath, but they should give the day off to their servants, to their livestock, and to the aliens.
Or a gas station. To the restaurant.
I want to come back to those kinds of issues in our discussion. Hopefully we'll have time for that. But I think one thing is really kind of amazing. You know, in the Old Testament, oftentimes females are overlooked or unnamed. Well, in this fourth commandment, they are not excluded, they're intentionally included.
Except the you. It depends on whether or not it said, you should not let, and then is the you male and female? So there is maybe an implied hierarchy there that starts with male.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the you here in the Hebrew, it's actually singular. So it's actually speaking to each person in the community. And I don't think it's making a distinction between male and female. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I could be wrong about that, but yeah, that's an interesting point. And then the final thing that I want to say about that is that although the fourth commandment does not actually say it, it appears to me as though by implication or inference, it's even saying to give nature a break. Give nature a break. I forgot something there. There's both a prohibition, do not work, and a command. Remember, keep the Sabbath. Yeah, we've already talked about that. Sorry. And this is a point that John Gary was making about the rationale behind the two different versions of the fourth commandment. And here's my conclusion about the people who are intended to be included. I mean, really, who's left out? Not even the livestock, not even the slaves, and I mentioned male or female slaves. And then I'm raising this question at the bottom, is not creation even also being given the gift of respite? So I'll just so Rabbi Hirsch was what came to be known as Orthodox Judaism. He was a mid-19th century German figure, and he asked the question, what was there to safeguard the world against humans? His answer, the Sabbath. Humans are allowed to rule over the world for 6 days with God's will. On the seventh, however, he is forbidden by divine behest to fashion anything for his own purpose. In this way, he acknowledges that he has no right of ownership or authority over the world. So this position kind of cuts both ways. On the one hand, it gives creation nature break. On the other hand, it relativizes our position in creation. We are not ultimately Lord of creation. John, you want to get in here? No? Oh, okay. So, question. Is the Sabbath a gift to us as humans or an obligation? Or is it both? I like the way German has compound words. In German, I hope this is right. Gabe oder Aufgabe. In other words, is Sabbath a gift to us, or is it a task that we do? Yes, I'm inclined to think it's both. Heschel says the Sabbath is the most precious present humankind has received from the treasure house of God. It is a day that ennobles the soul and makes the body wise. I mentioned Heschel's book last week called The Sabbath. It's really kind of a classic work, and it's not that long. How many people here have ever read that? My. Put it high on your reading list, because I think it might not bring about a conversion, but it may help you to think differently about time and space and what's sacred or not. Okay, so just a quick tour. And these are all in that sheet that I passed out to you. Other references to Sabbath. And we won't take the time to read this, it's going to take more time. The first one, notice, I'm sorry. The second one, I wanted to just focus on a little bit. Notice that this second one from Exodus 16 actually comes before Moses' encounter on Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 commandments from God. In other words, the Sabbath was the only one of the 10 commandments which was established in the experience of the people of Israel before Moses' encounter on Mount Sinai. And of course, if you read this, the occasion was the giving of the manna for the people to eat in the desert, in the wilderness. And that came, somebody brought that up last week. Yeah, it was in the context of that the people had to be told, on the 6th day, you will get twice as amount as every other day, and you should reserve some of it. Reserve it for the 7th day, and not go out and try to find more manna. The next, Psalm 92, does not really deal with the Sabbath as such, but the superscription through the whole psalm says, the psalm for the Sabbath day. And that particular psalm eventually was incorporated into the Jewish liturgy. And I think it's still used. And it has to do with creation somewhat. But look at the very end. We talked last time a bit, and Dale was probing this question. And what does Sabbath mean for us older people, retired people who don't work 6 days? What do we do with the Sabbath? Well, I don't know if this says anything or not, but in old age they still produce fruit. They are always green and full of sap, showing that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness. Do you feel green and full of sap? I have some days like that. Fewer and far between. The next one is Amos 8:6, and this is very intriguing because it really is making a connection between Sabbath and justice. There's a justice dimension to Sabbath, but it's really in the negative. What he's talking about here is, let's say, business people who just can't wait for the day of Sabbath to be over so they can get back to milking their customers, cheating their customers, dealing with both the people that they buy from and they sell to unjustly. And of course, we know Amos has an awful lot to say about justice. And then Isaiah 58 is in a somewhat similar vein. I'd like to read the prelude that goes before this particular message. See that this reference to the Sabbath is again given a justice hang to it. Okay. And by the way, I put that slide up about a concert this afternoon to invite you to come, but I also put it up to you as a forewarning saying that when we're done here, I'm going to have to get out of here because I'm going to be a Sunday church on my phone. So you can change those. I promise you next Sunday I'll stick around afterwards as long as anybody wants to. That you? Yeah. Okay. I am a collector of quotes. I must have 10,000 quotes. I've written out an index card in the last 10 to 15 years. I have files of quotes. So the Amos 8:4-6 passage, Hessel said, the things that horrify the prophets are even now daily occurrences all over the world. That is unjust dealing and apparently on the Sabbath. There is no society to which Amos's words would not apply. Second one from a Facebook friend of mine, never met her, but we've communicated. In modern parlance, work will never love you back, and it may even hasten your demise, but God will love you back. So will the friends and family, and animal companions, and vegetable gardens, and books that fill your Sabbaths. And that is from Dorothy Bass. And incidentally, that poem that June read to us came out of this book. This is an excellent book too. It's not that long. It's really about, it's receiving the day Christian practices for opening the gift of time. So it's really about how we use our time and how time can be a gift, even a sacred gift to us. And a few chapters here on Sabbath. And she says, keeping Sabbath not only brings us closer to the earth, but also begins the process of healing. There's a certain assumption there, I guess. I talked about this a little bit last week, that Sabbath is really a good time for enjoying God's creation. Nature. John Smith, I hope you don't mind if I use you as an example, but I love when John goes out for his nature walks on Sunday afternoon and then posts his pictures on Facebook. It's refreshing and it's informative, and because of John, I am learning more about invasive plants and trees and so forth.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was just thinking now about, I heard an interview on radio sometime in the last year or two where a young Jewish father was talking about implementing a electronic free Sabbath starting on Friday night. And obviously I wasn't following that Sabbath when I was posting. But there seems to me to be some reason to consider electronic Sabbath. But to this point, I maybe have considered it, haven't done it.
Yeah, I'm in the same mode as you, John. I had thought about that. That's the guy did one Lent. And that's actually maybe a good way to experiment with a Sabbath. An electronic free Sunday. Maybe we should all experiment with that. during Lent this year. Well, I would certainly hope, John, that Monday morning, we're all in bed and have a little breakfast to eat, and then you open up your computer and give us the fruits of your findings the day before. Okay. Are we supposed to put it towards those? Yeah. No. Okay. John, that was what you were concerned about. Question. So we don't have time to discuss these things, but to the point that June brought up here a bit ago, I remember that there was a large, very prosperous grocery store in Lancaster County that was midnight only. Those of you who are from Lancaster County would know which one I'm talking about if I gave you the name. And there was as I recall, in the Lancaster paper, a number of years ago, this probably is 15 years ago now, there was an article about them staying open on Sundays. They'd always close before on Sundays. And of course, the argument was they are competitively at a disadvantage by being closed on one of the days when people do most of their shopping, including grocery shopping. And I know that argument has also been used by some midnight owners of restaurants as well. So I don't know what you think about it. I'm sympathetic with the dilemma, and I don't understand the judgment of it. But I think this idea from Judith Shulitz, the Jewish writer on the Sabbath, is that she sees the fourth commandment as being a no meat clause. And that if everybody were to shut down their enterprises, nobody would be disadvantaged. Now, that's not the real world we live in, obviously, but it's an intriguing thought.
Isn't it true that Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A are closed on Monday?
Yeah.
Big chain.
Yeah, I mean, if we had more time for discussion, and like I said, I promise you we'll have more time next week, but I mean, there are all these practical issues. I am so glad that we raised our kids when we did, because when we raised our kids our kids were both athletic. They both played on sports teams and so forth. And we raised them exclusively in Mennonite communities, Scottsdale and Goshen. And at that point, there are no Sunday morning sporting events. That's changed. I mean, there are different congregations that I've been a part of. Parents have this dilemma. Well, their kids play in a hockey club, or they play in a sports soccer club, and they have traveling games on Sunday morning. What do you say? Okay. Thank you for your attention. We'll come back next week and wrap this up with a look at Jesus. Habit and practice and attitude towards that. Thank you.